Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are going to get started in just about 25 seconds or so, once we allow folks to jump on the call. Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are going to get started here in just about 10 seconds, just giving folks a chance to get their audio set up. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Indiana Youth Institute's webinar, Helping Youth Shift Their Thinking, Strategies for Reframing Negative Thoughts. My name is Joshua Long. I'm the Senior Educational Content Manager here at IYI. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We are grateful to have the chance to connect as a community of Indiana youth workers who remain committed to meeting the needs of our youth and children. For those who are not familiar with IYI, our mission is to improve the lives of all Indiana children by strengthening and connecting the people, organizations, and communities that are focused on kids and youth. Listed here, you can see our vision that drives the work we do for Indiana youth. And before we begin, I'm going to share a few pointers that will help you engage with today's webinar. For any technical support issues, use the chat feature to send a message and I will assist you. You can use this feature to converse with the group as well. We also encourage you to ask questions, so please use the Q&A feature for any you may have, and we will get to as many as possible. Feel free to also upvote great questions to the top. Later today, you will receive an email with a link to complete an evaluation of this webinar, as well as the presentation slides. Please take a few minutes to let us know your thoughts about the presentation, and if you don't receive the evaluation email, check your junk, as it may have been directed there. Once you complete the evaluation, you will be redirected to your certificate of participation. Like all of IYI's webinars, today's webinar will be posted on our website if you'd like to revisit a portion later or share the opportunity to listen in with partners. And with that, it is now my pleasure to turn it over to our speaker for today, Dr. Gabrielle Rodriguez. Dr. Rodriguez.
All right, thank you so much for having me, Josh. I'm really excited to be here today to be sharing about this topic with you all. I'm going to start by sharing my screen with you first. Hopefully this is going to work out here. We're just testing it out, so we'll get this going. I'm going to swap here in a moment. And then we'll get that happening. Let's see here. Okay, are we in the correct view here?
Yep, you're good.
All right, wonderful. All right, so I am super excited to be here, y'all. I am a clinical psychologist at Riley Children's Hospital, where I direct the ADHD and disruptive behavior disorders program, and I'm also an associate professor of clinical psychiatry at IU School of Medicine. I am going to be talking with you a little bit about helping youth shift their thinking and strategies for reframing negative thoughts. So just want to start just by talking a little bit about our agenda for today. So first, I want to just start by sharing a little bit about a theoretical model that I want us to have as our foundation, and then a case conceptualization. Then we'll talk a little bit about our actual topic, so reframing thoughts. And we'll share some resources together. We'll have some time for Q&A, but please do, as we go through today, share any questions that you have in the chat, and Josh will help me share those questions as we go, in addition to our time that we'll have for Q&A later. My goal really for today is that we all leave here today either learning or refining our existing approach to helping shifting this unhelpful thinking that can oftentimes happen in the youth that we work with. Okay, there we go. All right, so let's start by sharing this kind of theoretical model that's going to be the foundation for our work together today. So this cognitive theory is really kind of where everything is going to come from that we'll talk about today. It's often called the cognitive triangle. And the idea here is that everything that we think, feel, and do is connected, right? Our behaviors, our cognitions, and our emotions are all connected with each other. And what we know is that for all of us, these symptoms that often we experience when we're feeling depressed and when youth are feeling depressed, are comprised of all three of these. And the implication is that oftentimes when we want to change our emotion, we can't do so directly. We oftentimes want to, we'd love to be able to change when we're feeling down, but we're not able to target that directly. And so the implication is that what we can change, what we can target when we want to change our emotion are our behaviors or our cognitions. And so we're really going to focus today on changing our cognitions. Could be a whole other talk about what we can do to change our behaviors, but our cognitions will be our focus for today. This is our theoretical model. So focusing a little bit more on this theoretical model of depression. And by the way, we're really focusing on depression today because that is really where this kind of idea of the thought challenging strategy came from. But this can really apply to youth who are experiencing all different kinds of problems. It's just most commonly applied to youth who are experiencing depression. So this is the theoretical model that we often think of for depression. It really starts with these biological or inherited vulnerabilities. This could be things like family history. It could be a depression, depressogenic temperament. Then we also often have these early environmental variables, things like parenting, what's modeled for them, things like observed relationships in their household. Then we have these core beliefs that can be influenced by these biological or inherited vulnerabilities and these environmental variables. And these are things like their negative views of the self, negative views of the future, negative views of the world. Then what often happens is that youth can experience these activating events that impact these core beliefs and activate them. And then that leads to these depression symptoms that often are seen like automatic negative thoughts, these maladaptive behaviors, and negative emotions. And so these blue box on the right is what we often then see when someone's experiencing depression, this thinking, feeling, and doing in that kind of triangle that we saw earlier. And then what happens is that if we continue to experience these depression symptoms, and we often then that leads back to even more activating events. So if I'm feeling and thinking like I'm never going to be good at math, for example, and I have a test, then I'm probably not going to study for it. So I'm going to fail that test. And that leads to me having an even more negative view of myself. And that further perpetuates the depression, for example. And so you can see how this kind of cycle then continues and furthers that depression over time. And so let's take a look at what this might look like with a particular student. So let's say that a student has an anxious temperament. This is just kind of what their predisposition is, and they live in a particularly critical home environment. That may lead to some core beliefs of things like, I don't like myself. No one will ever like me. No one likes me. And an activating event might be something like a fight with their best friend, which then activates these core beliefs and results in symptoms like negative thoughts like nobody wants to be my friend, behaviors like social withdrawal, and the actions like anhedonia or feelings like anhedonia. And then what happens is over time, then it results to peers withdrawing from this student. Because peers stop reaching out, then this confirms the child believes that no one likes her. And that kind of, again, furthers this cycle. And so this is what this might really look like with a student over time. So what happens with youth is that they often, with youth with depression, have these habits of thought where they really just develop these certain ways of thinking pretty negatively about a lot of different things. They think about all the things that didn't go well. They say unkind things to themselves. They have these kind of solitary cognitions, like I'm alone, nobody wants to be my friend. they ruminate a lot over all of the things that didn't go well, their causes, their meaning, the implications for the future of these things. And in addition to that, they tend to have a lack of sense of agency about what they can do about it. They feel like there's really just, it's not worth trying. There's not a whole lot that they can do about these things that are happening to them. And so in cognitive behavior therapy, which is one of the main therapies that we use to address youth depression, what we want to do is we want to help youth to learn that when they feel down, they actually can take control of this feeling and they can do something about it. And so the approach in cognitive behavior therapy that we often use is called this primary secondary coping model. There's kind of two main ways that we can cope. So the primary way that we can cope is that rather than feeling helpless, we learn that we actually can influence certain things. So this is the idea of influencing objective conditions. So for example, here we can try to target things that are objects, people, events, circumstances, things like that, where we actually have control over them. But there are some scenarios where we actually can't influence them. We can't problem solve away. And so when we don't have influence over objective conditions, what we can do is we try to adapt to them. And so in those scenarios, when we can't change the situation, what we try to do is we change what we do in the face of the situation, and we try to cope with it better. And so the target there are things like our wishes, our expectations, our goals, our beliefs, or our attitudes. I'm curious if some folks can put in the chat some examples of what might be some situations that folks are in the first category. What are some things that youth might be able to try to problem solve versus some secondary coping, some things that maybe they can't problem solve, but they might try to cope with? So let's start with the primary coping. What are some things that youth might try to problem solve away? So I'm looking for things that they can actually change. Problems, poor grades, yeah. Friend group issues, choosing a healthy snack, friend groups. I love these examples, right? So poor grades, that's something that we can influence. We can try to study a little bit more. We can get help with homework. We can choose healthy snacks to feel better. Hygiene is something that we can try to solve. We can do something about that. Great examples. What about in the second category? What are some things that maybe are happening in our lives or maybe happening in youth lives that they may not be able to objectively change that situation. So they may just need to learn how to cope with those types of situations. Parents divorcing, home environment, excellent examples. What are some other? Family dynamics, bullying, medical diagnosis, natural disasters, poverty, foster care. Excellent examples here of situations where there's not a whole lot that students can do to change those scenarios. So we may need to focus on coping. So that's really going to be our focus today, right? Because when we can problem solve, absolutely, let's problem solve, right? That is oftentimes a little bit easier to do, right? It comes a little bit more naturally to us adults to help students and youth problem solve. It can be a lot more challenging to deal with things like how do we change our thoughts related to such difficult matters like addictions at home, having a parent who's incarcerated, dealing with socioeconomic issues, changes in residence, right? These are really challenging issues. And so how do we shift our thinking in such ways to help us cope with these very difficult conditions that a lot of our youth are managing? So let's talk about it. So our treatment rationale, thinking a little bit more about kind of how this all comes together in cognitive behavior therapy, back to our student here. So this is kind of how generally in cognitive behavior therapy, the different types of strategies come together. So we may use something like relaxation strategies to cope with an anxious temperament. We may use something like problem solving to cope with a critical home environment. So for example, we may use some problem solving communication strategies to work with parents. We may use reframing thoughts, right? So this thought of nobody wants to be my friend. That's where reframing thoughts may come in, and that's what we'll focus our attention on today. We may use something like behavioral activation to manage anhedonia, present positive self-presentation there. And then the idea is that over time, all of these skills can come together to break this cycle, right? To gather evidence to help weaken these core beliefs, so that over time youth recognize, actually, I am likable, and we remove these depression symptoms. So this is kind of how cognitive behavior therapy works together to address these concerns. So how do core beliefs relate to these negative automatic thoughts and feelings? So core beliefs are beliefs about the self based on early life experiences with which a child may interpret events and which may then influence behaviors. So they're really activated by negative or stressful events, and they result in these automatic negative thoughts. So some common core beliefs are things like, I am unlovable, I'm helpless, I'm worthless, I'm inadequate. And so to really address these cognitive components, we really have to go back to these core beliefs, which again are these negative views of the self, the future, and the world. And so the automatic negative thoughts are our inroads to these core beliefs, because it really can be difficult to attack the core beliefs head on. But why do we want to identify the negative thoughts? Well, what we know is that negative thoughts have a really powerful influence on what we feel and what we do, right? Going back to this cognitive triangle we were talking about earlier. And we know that people with depression tend to have these global, stable, internal negative beliefs that we were just talking about. And again, the negative thoughts are these proximal indices of these negative core beliefs. And these negative thoughts often are really automatic. They happen really quickly and without notice. And so a lot of times we tend to not consider them in terms of their trueness. We just kind of accept them, and we can't change them if we don't know that they're there. And so what we really want to do is we want to help youth learn that the way that we think about a situation actually is under our control. And we want to help them find ways and strategies that they can do that.
Gabby, we had a question in the chat. At what age are these core beliefs formed?
Thank you. Yes, that they often are formed very early on. It's of course dependent on the person, but they can happen really early in childhood. And what's interesting is that they persist throughout our lives. And so oftentimes that's what's really challenging, is that they form early. I mean, it can be as early as like age 5 or earlier, and then they persist for forever. And we just kind of spend our life kind of gathering additional evidence for these core beliefs. And oftentimes we do so in a kind of automatic way without really recognizing that we're doing so. And so that's why it's so important to kind of have this process, because a lot of us are doing this, whether we're depressed or not, a lot of us are doing this automatically. Really, really good question. So why do we want to reframe these negative thoughts? Why revise these cognitive distortions? Well, what we know is that in particularly depressed youth show this preference for negative information. We kind of make these negative attributions and fail to question the accuracy or the probability for how accurate these beliefs are. And so we want to practice finding more helpful, more realistic alternatives. I want to really highlight, and I'm going to harp on this a lot today, that the idea here is not positive thinking. This is not a positive thinking strategy. This is a realistic, helpful thinking strategy. And so that's what we're in the business of. And so over time, what we know is that questioning these automatic negative thoughts, these automatic negative beliefs becomes easier the more that we do it. And it may lead to long-term changes in these core beliefs if we practice, right? So what we don't want to do is take these negative thoughts at face value. And what we know is that if we do over time practice this reframing, we can practice, find these more realistic, more helpful alternatives so that we don't accept the negative thoughts right away. We can kind of chip away at these core beliefs little by little. Okay, so going back to this case conceptualization, right? This is our same kid from before, right? If we can use this reframing, we can help the child change the negative thought to something a little bit more realistic. Then hopefully the idea is that they might engage in different behaviors, and that may lead then to different feelings. So, for example, this negative automatic thought, nobody wants to be my friend. If instead we have a more realistic thought, well, actually, Bob, Kelly, and Jess are all my friends, and they ask me to do things. That's a more realistic thought. Then over time, we may see, most friends fight at some point. That's another more realistic thought. Over time, we may see then changes. Excuse me, I missed the spot here. We may see changes in their social withdrawal behavior, changes in their anhedonia behavior that then will lead to the changes we want to see in their overall depression. So an overview of how you may do this with the youth that you work with, the youth that you see in your kind of everyday, what you do every day. So what we first want to do is we want to help the youth understand that what we think about the situation affects how we feel about that situation. And I'm going to go in depth into each of these steps here shortly. Next, we can use an example that is what we call the blue glasses activity, which I'm also going to explain. Then we can teach some types of negative thoughts that folks often have. Then, of course, we want to relate it to the youth's life. Then we want to get the youth to understand that just because we think something doesn't mean that it's true. Oftentimes, if we can just create that little tiny shred of doubt, that can make a really big difference. And then finally, we get into the really tough business of practicing changing our thoughts. So very first step here is in this part of connecting this cognitive triangle. So this is a really good way to introduce the thinking, feeling, doing triangle or the cognitive triangle. Depending on the youth's age, you can kind of use different terms. But for younger kids, being able to think about our thinking, right, that metacognition can be kind of hard. So it can be helpful to introduce it in this kind of way, or you can use thought bubbles and cartoons. But this can be kind of one interesting way. So one way that I introduce it to kids is to say, let's imagine a rainy day. Okay, so let's say that in this rainy day, what happens is that you think, oh, the rain has ruined my day. There's nothing to do inside. How do you think we might feel if we think that? You can put it in the chat. What are some feelings somebody might have? Disappointed, crummy, sad, bored, discouraged. Absolutely. And what might somebody do? Yeah, we're thinking it's going to be a terrible day, go back to bed, sleep, nothing, fall into that dark feeling, complain, think negative. Absolutely, right? I love it. So lie under the couch under a blanket, screen time. Absolutely, right? So if we are thinking about a rainy day, the rain has ruined my day, there's nothing to do inside, what we might do is go back to bed, say no when mom suggests an activity, and we might feel tired, bored, and lonely, right? And so our thought, the rain ruined my day, there's nothing to do inside, really affected our behavior and it really affected our feelings. And all of these are kind of pretty negative. Okay. But instead, let's say same rainy day. Okay. But instead, we think, great, now I don't have to mow the lawn. So I can have fun with a friend. What might we think? What might we do and feel instead if we're having this thought instead? Call a friend, feel happy, feel hopeful, feel energized, relieved, work on another project, find a good movie to watch. I love these examples. Absolutely, right? So instead we're having this more helpful thought. Great, now I don't have to mow the lawn. I can have fun with a friend. So we invite a friend over, hang out and watch a movie, and we're feeling happy, excited, and energized, right? So the rainy day did not change. The only thing that changed here was our thought about the rainy day, but our thought had a lot of power, right? Our thought then changed our behavior, which then in turn changed our emotion. So this is a really helpful way that we can introduce to youth the power of our thinking, right? Which then affects our feeling and our behavior, and then it illustrates the connection. So this is oftentimes how I introduce this to kids. So now that we've made this connection between our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors, and we can talk with youth about this kind of next thing, which I like to call the blue glasses activity. And a lot of times in my office, I have these huge, really hilarious kind of clown sized blue glasses, and I have kids put them on, and I have them put on these blue glasses and look around. And they're humongous, and they look around in these blue glasses, or you can just have them imagine putting on these humongous blue glasses, and the lenses are actually blue. And I have them look around, and when they look around with their blue glasses, I ask them to see what things look like. And usually they say things like, well, things look dark. And I'm like, okay, things look dark. How else do they look? Well, maybe a little bit blurry, maybe a little bit, I don't know, kind of distorted. I'm like, oh, okay. And I ask them some leading questions here, like, oh, do they look accurate? Do they look as they really are? Right. That's kind of the idea. And then I ask them to take off these blue glasses and look around again. Okay, well, how does the world look now? Usually they say things like, oh, well, it looks a little brighter, it looks a little clearer. I'm like, oh, does it look as it is? Does it look more accurate, right? So that's kind of the idea that having blue thoughts or having depression can be like looking at the world through these blue glasses. Things are not actually as they are. And our work together to try to change thoughts is really to try to see things more clearly by removing the glasses and more realistically, right? Our work together is not to go on and put on pink glasses, right? That's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to see everything all Pollyanna. Oh, kids don't get that reference anymore. But the idea is not let's put on pink glasses and everything's perfect and beautiful. That's not what we're doing here. We're just trying to remove the blue glasses and see things as they actually are more realistically. So that can be a really fun activity to kind of illustrate what we're doing together. So then we introduce some types of negative thoughts. And these are, of course, not exhaustive. There's all different types of negative thoughts. But for especially younger kids, this can be kind of a helpful group of categories. So blue thoughts, the B can be for blaming ourselves. So one type of blaming self thoughts is, for example, if I hadn't misbehaved, my mom would still be taking care of me. So we often hear this type of blaming self thought from kids. Looking for the bad news. My new school doesn't have a computer room. It totally sucks. Unhappy guessing. Those kids are laughing. I bet they think I'm stupid. Exaggerating. Imagining a disaster. I failed this test. My life is totally ruined, right? All kinds of things that kids kind of can exaggerate. So these are just some examples, right? And so we can help kids get some categories of different types of blue thoughts to help them get an idea of the types of negative automatic thoughts that everybody can experience, but especially youth with depression. And it's kind of a useful acronym to help kids remember the types of blue thoughts that they can have. So now let's practice together some of the types of blue thoughts or let's practice determining whether a thought is a true thought or a blue thought. Let's see. Okay, so I'm gonna show y'all some different types of thoughts, and I would like you to put in the chat whether it's a blue thought, which means it's distorted, it's not accurate, it's a thinking error, or it's a true thought, which means, yes, this is a thing that is happening. It may not be awesome, but it's true. All right, my parents are getting divorced. Is this a blue thought or a true thought? All right, you got it, true thought, not distorted. My parents are getting divorced and my life will be ruined. Absolutely. It's a blue thought. It's a blue thought. The first part might be happening, but this kind of second clause here, my life will be ruined, is a distorted component. I failed my pop quiz. Yep, true. Probably not awesome, but definitely a true thought. I failed my pop quiz and I'm just so stupid. Blue, right? We absolutely do not need this second piece here. All right. Now, let's talk a little bit about identifying unhelpful thoughts. So, one thing that's really important is that oftentimes what the youth tells you may not be the distorted thought itself. You may need to do a little bit of kind of pulling to identify that. And we'll talk in a second about how to do that. But the important thing to know is that the distortion might lie in the meaning that the youth are making of the thoughts about themselves, about the world, or about the future. So let's talk a little bit about what that might look like. So, for example, if a youth is saying, "My dad yelled at me," what might be a meaning that a youth might make of that thought about either themselves or the world or the future, where the distorted thought or the unhelpful thought might actually be? What are some examples that they might make of that? My dad yelled at me and he doesn't love me. My dad yelled at me and he hates having me around. My dad yelled at me and I'm a bad kid. I'm not good enough. And he hates me. Excellent. Very good examples. And these are often things that the kids are actually thinking, right? And that's where the distortion lies. My dad yelled at me may be true itself, right? But the blue thought may be in the added distortion. Why do people add in the distortion? Why does it sometimes feel better, safer to add in the blue thoughts? So I think I think if I'm understanding your question, Andrea, is why does it sometimes feel better, safer to add in the blue thought? I think where you're going with that is that it's something that people do automatically. And I think it goes back to the fact that oftentimes these core beliefs are something we've held kind of close within us from early childhood. And that's probably why people do it so automatically. Does that answer your question? I hope it does. If not, feel free to elaborate a little bit more and I'll come back to it. Okay. Yes, I think that's why it's automatic. We've been doing it since early childhood. And so that's why we go to it. And that's why it's so important that we practice this so regularly, because for many of us, these are just kind of core beliefs we've held for so long. And so that's why. Yes, ACEs, thank you for pointing that out. These are often coming from trauma that we've experienced since early childhood. And so it just feels comfortable in kind of in a difficult way. Okay, so next, I don't live with my mom. What may be the distortion or the meaning that someone is making of that, where the distortion may lie? I don't live with my mom and she doesn't love me. She doesn't want me. My dad is stuck with me. I'm a bad person. I'm the reason. I'm not important to her. Yes, exactly. So that's where we want to target, right? Those are the unhelpful thoughts that we want to target. I don't live with my mom is a fact. The other pieces are the ones where we want to reframe. I don't have good grades. I'm stupid. I'm not smart. I'm dumb. I'm a failure. I'm a disappointment. I can't do this. Absolutely. Excellent examples, right? So y'all are absolutely on target, right? These right here are not targetable in terms of unhelpful thoughts. These are facts, but we absolutely can target these other unhelpful thoughts in terms of reframing. Excellent work. So how do we identify these, right? Because kids may not come out and tell them. We might have some ideas about what the unhelpful thought might be, but we can't necessarily tell them. So if you have a hunch, it's more powerful if the youth arrives at it themselves. So what are some types of questions that we might ask to actually get to that unhelpful thought? So let's say, for example, the situation is the youth says, my dad yelled at me, like in this past slide. So you may say something like, well, what do you think it means that he yelled at you? They may say, I don't know, he's always yelling at me. Okay, so if someone's always yelling at you, what does that mean about how they feel about you? It means he's not mad at me or doesn't love me. Okay, so what would be worse, if he's mad at you or if he doesn't love you? I guess it would be worse if he didn't love me, because it means he doesn't want me. Oh, I see. So when your dad yells at you, you think he doesn't love me and he doesn't want me. So this is just an example of how this conversation might go, right? So now we have kind of gotten to the point where we're in the situation and we have identified what the unhelpful thought is. So next, we want to help youth understand, how should I answer a child who said it? I don't have a mom or dad, but they are not with them. Thank you, Rochelle. I'm gonna hold on to that one for the Q&A because that's a really, really good question. So next we want to help student understand that just because we think something doesn't mean it's true. So at the very least, what we want to do at this point is just create a little bit of doubt in their negative automatic thoughts. So they're not just automatically accepting them as facts. If we've done that, we've already done a lot. So again, we're not trying to get positive thoughts. This is the graphic that comes with this. I don't love it. So I put a little bit of like more helpful, realistic thoughts. So we just want to say, okay, so that is your thought. It's there. We've identified it as a blue negative thought. And now we just want to recognize that it may or may not be true. It's there. It may or may not be true. And then we want to move into the process of identifying a more helpful, more realistic thought. So let's talk about how to do that. So the process of reframing thoughts, first, of course, we identify what the unhelpful thought is. Oftentimes, one thing that can be helpful is to have the student identify what their mood is when they think that unhelpful thought. And then we want to move into using Socratic questioning to help the youth generate more helpful, more realistic thoughts. I'm going to talk about how to do that in a moment. And then we want to help the student understand, or the youth understand, how their true thoughts can actually actively counteract those blue thoughts. And then have them understand how their mood can change when they think those true thoughts versus when they were thinking those blue thoughts. So let's talk about why it's important, though, to use Socratic questioning to help the youth generate those thoughts, those more helpful thoughts themselves, rather than having us tell them. So one thing that happens a lot is that adults, especially adults who work with youth, tend to be very supportive and caring. And oftentimes we know what we want to say to help kids feel better when stuff comes up. And we just want to tell them that thing. But a lot of times that we know that it's actually more helpful if they come up with the thing themselves. So let's say, for example, that there's a student who has glasses and they are feeling kind of nervous because they're going to they just got glasses for the first time and they're like, oh my gosh, everyone's going to laugh at me and call me four eyes. I'd love for y'all to put into the chat some ideas about what you might want to say to this student. What are some supportive statements that you might want to say to a student who just got glasses to make them feel better? So I love where you're going, Nathan, but you're, yes, you're getting ahead of me. So the glasses look great on you. Don't worry about what others think. Yes, those are some supportive statements. Wow, your new glasses look awesome. Don't worry about what others think. Glasses look great on you. You're so smart. Exactly. You're going to be so strong now. All right. So these are exactly the types of support. You're going to be able to see so much more. These are exactly the types of supportive statements that a lot of adults will want to say to students to try to make them feel better, right? Things like lots of kids wear glasses. Lots of celebrities and famous people wear glasses. Your friends won't laugh at you. Love the color, things like that. However, while all of these are really nice things to say, what we know is that it is actually much more effective, and a couple of you are already getting there. It's actually much more effective if we help students get to those supportive statements on their own. So what we can do instead is turn what we'd like to say into questions so the student can arrive at these supportive statements for themselves and get to that thought on their own. So instead, what we can do is ask questions like, so does anybody in your class wear glasses? Huh, okay. Do any kids you like or popular kids wear glasses? Oh, okay. Do your friends make fun of other kids who wear glasses? Would you make fun of another kid who wears glasses? Right? So the idea is that we want to ask them some kind of leading questions, like so some Socratic questions to help them arrive at this thought of, oh, actually, other kids in my class wear glasses. And a lot of the popular kids and kids I like wear glasses. And actually, my friends and I don't make fun of kids who wear glasses. And I would never make fun of a kid who wears glasses. So it turns out I actually don't really need to be worried about this because I have a lot of evidence that suggests that this is not really a concern, right? So it's more powerful if we ask these leading questions and help them arrive at these conclusions on their own. Okay. And the thing is, there may be some situations where it may be a true concern. It could be that some kids will laugh, but is it really everybody? Everybody's going to laugh, or might it be just a few kids? And if they do laugh, how long is that going to last? Is it going to be forever, or is it going to be maybe a day and then everybody's going to forget about it? And is it like, do kids drop out of school because they make fun of them for wearing glasses, right? So it's one of those things that, we want to use this Socratic questioning as our approach rather than these statements that we know will make kids feel better maybe, but it's not as powerful as if they arrive at it themselves. So Socratic questioning, right, is just this kind of fancy way of describing something a lot of us are probably doing anyway, where we take this role of this gentle questioner, exploring the beliefs that kids have in order to help them arrive at a better evaluation of these kind of catastrophic thoughts that they may have, especially if they're feeling depressed. Kind of like a confused detective. So it's this simple but strong method for exploring ideas, often thought of as this collaborative empiricism. But the emphasis is really on exploration rather than explanation, because we could just tell kids that their beliefs don't make sense, but it's much more convincing, again, if they arrive at that conclusion themselves. So here are some helpful types of questions that we can use for Socratic questioning. So there's different kind of types. So these are all the different types that you can for Socratic questioning. But I'm going to kind of use a few examples. So for clarification questions, one thing that you can do is help youth get really specific about what it is that their belief is. So for example, if they're saying something like, oh, if I don't study all night, I'm going to fail my exam. You could say something like, okay, well, what do you mean by fail? Does that mean below 80%, below 50%? What exactly do you mean? Could you give me an example? You could use reasons or evidence probing questions. So what is your evidence? What led you to that belief? If they say something like, if I see a dog, it's going to chase me. Well, how do you know? Has that happened before? That's the kind of question that you could ask for reasons or evidence probing. You could ask origins or source questions, things like, where did you get this idea? Is that source credible? Is there any possibility that that is not credible or that that won't happen? You could ask viewpoint or perspective questions. So this is one of my favorites. Like, what would you tell a friend? What would a friend say to you? Is there another way of looking at it? What could happen instead? Like if a kid's saying, if I blush, people will think I'm stupid. You might ask something like, well, what else might they think? Is there any possibility that they might think something different? Implications or consequence questions. How bad would this be if this did happen? Let's say that if you did get a C, how bad would that be? What could you do to handle it? What effect would it have? What's the worst thing that could happen? Would it be so bad if it did happen? Have you ever thought something that wasn't true before, right? So remember, one of the best sources for youth to believe is their own previous experience. And so in reality, a lot of times their predictions for what might happen is usually much worse than what did happen. So you might help them remember some of those things that, especially if you've had a long-standing relationship with them, you can help them remember what happened before. So it's important to come back to those facts. All right, a couple of common pitfalls when we're using these kind of reframing strategies. Sometimes youth say that they have no such thoughts. They've never had negative thoughts in their entire lives. That happens sometimes. But if you think that they do, it can be helpful to kind of be Socratic still, but maybe use a role play. You could say things like, oh, another kid I know blah, 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 and say a similar situation for something that may have happened that's similar. You could use things like video clips, or a lot of times I'll pull up YouTube and just a similar situation and be like, well, what do you think that kid is thinking? And then use that. Sometimes if you kind of externalize it from their own situation a bit, it's easier to have the conversation. Sometimes youth who are really active, this happens in my clinic all the time. I work with a lot of youth with ADHD. So just sitting down and having this like type of conversation is just not going to happen. And so we can turn it into a little bit more of a game. So you might throw a ball back and forth, talk about catching the thought. And so we'll have a conversation and we switch. Anytime a negative thought comes up when we're telling a story, that's when we switch throwing the ball. Also, youth who just aren't very cognitive or don't seem to be able to think about their own thoughts, that can be pretty tough. And so again, focusing on others or finding really kind of concrete examples can be helpful. Or just having not enough time to get through all the material in one meeting, that also can be really tough. So I don't have a lot of solutions for that one. It's a lot easier in my clinics. I have hour-long visits. And so if you don't have that, then just trying to kind of shorten it and get to the point really quickly can be useful. But I recognize that's a challenge that folks have who aren't in a kind of traditional kind of clinic setting. And I also want to say, of course, this is something that anybody can use in terms of who works with youth. But of course, when youth are experiencing depression and need additional support, this is something that's really common. We know that a lot of youth experience depression. It's really common. 1 in 5 youth before age 18 experience a depressive episode. It's really common, especially in girls. And it's got a chronic and recurrent course. It predicts adult depression. And, in terms of what we're looking for, one of the things that, as y'all know, I'm sure, is really different in youth is that it can manifest as irritability. And so it doesn't look in youth like it looks in adults. And so if that is something that you're seeing in the youth you're working with, there are resources available. We have, fortunately in Indiana, 988 is a really good resource that you can use for getting some support if anybody's experiencing a mental health crisis. One thing that I often hear in my clinic is that folks don't know that you can call even if you are not yourself the one experiencing a crisis. So I always just say that, and to anybody that I'm talking with, is that you can always call 988, and it doesn't have to be a suicidal crisis. It can be any type of mental health crisis. So please do reach out to 988. And there is a QR code here for the 988 Indiana website. The other thing I wanted to share about 988 is that it does have resources by county in Indiana. And so you can go there for looking up resources by county in terms of folks to contact, as well as different clinics that are available to you. And these slides will be shared, so you can always come back and look at the QR codes and links. A couple of other resources I wanted to share. I love the Child Mind Institute because they have articles about like anything and everything under the sun. So if I'm ever looking up for a topic the other thing I love is that all of the articles on there are reviewed by professionals. And so I can be confident that the information is evidence-based. So I just wanted to share that resource. And finally, I wanted to share a resource from Kicking the Stigma, which is, Kicking the Stigma and our department at Riley and IU School of Medicine Psychiatry put together this behavioral health resource guide. It was really focused on schools, but really anybody can use it. And it's got some resources about ADHD and disruptive behavior, anxiety, depression and suicide, and trauma and resilience. And it's free, so feel free to access it if you are interested. So I just wanted to share that with y'all in case it is helpful. And here are my references, and hopefully we have about 10 minutes for Q&A. So yeah, I will stop sharing so that we can have a little bit of conversation, and then we can go back to, let me see, I can stop sharing. We can go back to our conversation.
Great. As you're doing that, I will read the first question.
Thank you.
Your own child often gives short or avoidant answers. What are some Socratic style questions that can gently pull more out of him without making him feel pressured, especially in a way that does not seem like I'm interrogating him?
Okay, so
If
short
you click
answers.
Q&A, you can read it. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Can you stop sharing for me? I can't figure out how to do it, or maybe I
You're,
already
you're good. You're not sharing anymore.
did. Okay, great. My own child often gives short avoidant answers. There are some Socratic style questions I can. Yeah. Frankly, I would say that the setting is often one thing that I would pay attention to. I think when kids know that we are, it's different for us in a therapy setting because they kind of know that that's what they're there for. But even then, um, when we're sitting there face to face, it can feel like an interrogation. And so oftentimes this is where play comes in. And so if we are kind of engaged in an activity, playing Uno, playing Legos, doing whatever, like shooting baskets, whatever the case might be, that oftentimes can make a really big difference. And then kind of bringing in the questions. And so I think what I would say is it's more about what the activity is that's happening behind the scenes than the specific questions, if that makes sense. Because oftentimes when there's something else going on, kids loosen up a little bit more. And then oftentimes it's the short or avoidant answers are okay for a little while and just persist. Um, does that answer your question, Kelsey? I think that would be my advice. Is doing some activities behind the scenes and then kind of catch them when they're already. Yes, and I'm curious is a really good question. The other thing I would say is sometimes if kids are giving me pretty short or avoidant answers, I might say something like, no, I might think this or that. I'm curious, does that ever happen? Or is that do either of those ring true for you? Sometimes giving kids kind of like multiple choice answers and saying, like, I wonder if any of those feel like they might be true for you, can provide them with some options in a way that is a little bit less it's somewhat leading because it's giving them some choices, but it's not saying I think you feel this way. It's just saying you could feel this way, or you could feel that way, or you could feel that way. Do any of those feel true, or is something totally different true for you? And then that sometimes, especially for kids who struggle with maybe emotion identification, could be a way to at least open the door a little bit. Yeah, kids feel when we're sitting together watching something on YouTube or a movie more relaxed than when we're one-on-one. Yeah, absolutely. These like if we're like face to face, that can feel really hard, probably for anybody, but I think especially for kids. So yeah, doing an activity can be really helpful. A teen who I mentor is depressed. She's just beginning therapy. I really want to address her hygiene, soiled clothes, and unwashed hair, as I think it would make a huge difference in how she feels. I feel our relationship is more important than her self-care, but I would love to have your thoughts on this matter. Yeah, that is a really good question. I think one thing that can be challenging with hygiene is that it's so deeply personal and addressing it can feel like criticism. And oftentimes I think this is probably true for youth or adults, we're keenly aware of it. So it's not necessarily that we don't know that we haven't taken care of our hygiene. It often, though, when we're depressed, brushing our teeth feels like climbing Mount Everest. And so it's not necessarily that we don't want to do it or that we're not aware of it. It's that it's just so, it feels insurmountable in the context of our depression. And so I think it's, one of those things where I might consider it as part of like a behavioral activation plan and kind of consider where they would put those steps to move in the direction of hygiene in the context of a behavioral activation plan as an activity. And so that those would be my thoughts is like consider where they prioritize that in terms of their own kind of feeling good. But yeah, I hear you. That's really tough to prioritize a relationship versus like how it might feel like criticism to them. As a coach, I have an unfortunate but perhaps natural desire to avoid engaging with youth who have a clingy negativity. Any tips for giving them attention without feeling like I'm empowering their negativity and bringing both of us down? Yeah, that is tough. I think, yeah, it's tough. I would love to hear what other folks have to say about it in the chat, because I think it is really tough, because it is a lot of times I think we perceive some of these behaviors as perhaps attention seeking, and I think they are, in that kids do need this kind of help. They need this support. And we don't necessarily want to reinforce it, but we do want to provide support. And so it does feel, I think, for adults, like a very fine line of like, how do I provide support without reinforcing this behavior that I know isn't helpful to you? So I absolutely hear you. The question is, how do we give kids who have this negativity attention without feeling like we're empowering, or maybe another word is like reinforcing the negativity without bringing both down? I wonder if one way, and again, I'd love to hear others' thoughts, because I think this is a really tough balance, is to bring folks along with you. So to encourage activities and say, hey, I'm going to do this. I want you to join me, so that you are always keeping that door open, and always letting this youth know that they are loved and included and part of the group, and also allowing them the space to feel their feelings, right? Because I think that's part of adolescence, is really challenging, and can pay me to be an adolescent again ever. And so not necessarily going so far out of your way that you're like, hey, come, right? And necessarily reinforcing it too much, but always letting them know that they are part of the group, that they are included, that they're invited, and persisting in that way. But then also allowing them to make their choice about whether they pursue that option. But again, yeah, so Kara said, perhaps modeling alternative speech, thoughts, behavior, actions without words. Sometimes that's worked for me. My daughter is very much that way. I'm always trying to find things about her day that she enjoyed. I also take lots of walks outside with her, and we have some special activities that we do together to encourage new conversation. Walks and activities help her to pull that way. Yeah, asking them what would they do instead, making them start thinking about, yeah, doing things differently. I love that.
So that's all the questions, but just, oh wait, Kimberly said I've used options and choices. You can choose to do A, you can choose to do B. I hope you choose B. So you don't miss out and we don't miss out on wonderful you. We do have just like another minute. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on if this is happening in a group setting. And so the coach's question made me think, what if this is happening like while you are coaching, or while you are teaching, or while you're within a group of students?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I never want to lose the power of positive reinforcement. I know maybe that sounds silly, but I think we can always attend what we want to pay more attention to the behaviors we want to see, right? So even if it's successive approximations, even if it's a little bit in the direction of what we eventually want to see, one little step in that direction, let's be like, hey, that was awesome, right? I love that you joined a little bit more today. Even if it's a little more than yesterday, let's call that behavior out and let's praise it, because we're more likely to see that again tomorrow.
Great, great. And I think with that, we will go ahead and finish up. So Dr. Rodriguez, can you see my screen? Okay, good.
Yes.
I just want to first thank Dr. Rodriguez for the wonderful presentation and the practical strategies around reframing negative thoughts. It's super important information. As we finish up here, I'm going to bring a few events to your attention. The first is IYI's 2025 College and Career Readiness Regional Conferences. They're focused on the key role community partnerships play in supporting the educational and workforce success of Indiana's youth. We have 3 of them, September 3rd, 4th, and 5th in North, Central, and Southern Indiana. So consider attending those. The next is we hope you join us at our 2025 Kids Count Conference for a 2-day experience dedicated to your work in supporting the well-being of children in Indiana. This conference is a celebration of the impactful work you do every day, designed to inspire and provide you with the knowledge, tools, and strategies needed to make a lasting impact on the lives of Hoosier youth. And just as a note, the keynote is Max Greenfield, who is Schmidt on New Girl, which I think is really cool. It's also a children's book author. And then finally, we do have some more upcoming events. In addition to our college and career offerings in September, we also have a few other things going on. We do have two webinars scheduled, and then we always have a ton of youth worker cafes that you can sign up and attend. So feel free to go to iyyi.org/events to check those out. And then finally, you can receive the latest updates and opportunities by signing up for our newsletter at iyyi.org/newsletters. That comes out every Friday. As we conclude, I sincerely thank you for being with us today. We appreciate your impact, voice, and choice to learn and partner with IYI. This afternoon, you will receive an email that includes a copy of the presentation and a link to complete an evaluation of this webinar. Please take a few minutes to let us know what you thought about the presentation. Upon completion, you will be redirected to your certificate. If you don't receive the evaluation email, check your junk as it may have been directed there. And so with that, we will conclude our presentation, and I will just thank you one more time for showing up today and every day for Indiana's youth. Have a great afternoon.